It was long ago in a small village where everyone knew each other. It was midnight. A guy was walking along the shore of the lake when he heard a splash in the water and a beautiful melodic singing. It was a young, beautiful girl. The guy approached the lake and started talking to her. "Are you trying to get sick? Get out of the water." The girl turned silently and looked at him. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I haven't seen you here before." "Angela," the girl replied. "I'm a mermaid." And then she mysteriously smiled. "My name is Alex. Can you come out of the water?" "Actually, we're not allowed to do that. I could be severely punished." "I would really like to take a walk with you and talk." "Is that a problem?" The girl replied, laughing. "Walk along the shore, and I'll swim not far from you." And so they talked all night long. When the first roosters crowed, the girl suddenly became nervous and said it was time for her to leave. The guy asked if they could meet again. The girl nodded in agreement and disappeared underwater. The next night, the guy stood on the shore again, waiting for the arrival of the same girl. The story repeated itself. On the following night, when they met again, they had an interesting conversation. Angela said she was allowed to come out of the water, but not for long. The guy was very happy. As they walked along the shore holding hands, she handed him a locket and said it was a gift. The guy held it tightly, then put it around his neck. As dawn approached and the first roosters crowed, the girl bid farewell to the guy again, this time kissing him, and dove into the water. After a while, Angela cautiously peeked her head out of the water to see if the guy had left. Once she was sure he wasn't nearby, she emerged from the water, approached the rocks, retrieved her outer clothing, and on her way back home to her grandmother, she thought, "How lucky I am that my parents sent me to spend the summer with Grandma. I haven't seen her since I was born. It's so fortunate that my sisters called me home, and I didn't want to go, so I stayed in the water. How lucky I am that I decided to play a trick on that guy walking along the shore, telling him I'm a mermaid. I think I've fallen in love with him." Arriving home, Grandma was already awake and asked where she had been all night. Angela left home when her grandmother went to bed and returned before she woke up. And where did the locket with her photo go? The girl decided to share her joy about her new lover and told her the whole story. Grandma asked who this guy was, asked her to tell his name and describe his appearance, as everyone in the village knew each other. The girl described him, but her grandmother's words shocked her. "You know, dear, I wouldn't meet with him anymore. I wouldn't at all. He disappeared without a trace a year ago." The granddaughter didn't believe her grandmother and ran around the village asking about the guy. Panic erupted in the village and everyone went to the lake. They searched for traces of the guy for a long time, but to no avail. Suddenly, some old lady asked, "Where were you swimming when you first saw this guy?" The girl pointed to a very inconspicuous spot near the rocks. Suddenly, a skeleton with the remains of a body and clothes emerged from the water, and hanging around the skeleton's neck was Angela's locket. In the early 80s, when computers and mobile phones were still unimaginable luxuries, we barefoot kids had far more fun than today's youngsters. There were no computers or cell phones, but we had countless outdoor games that brought us joy and laughter. We knew dozens of ball games, each of us owning at least one ball, especially those small rubber ones, usually red or blue with striking contrasting stripes. I remember summer evenings in the courtyard when we would take out our simple but endlessly precious childhood treasures and forget about everything else. Often our mothers couldn't find us in the evenings, as we would be playing nearby in a game of dodgeball, kick the can, or soccer. The older kids never shooed us away, instead letting us join in their activities and keeping an eye on us. We rarely ventured beyond the courtyard because behind our house stretched a vast weed-covered vacant lot, bordered by newly planted trees intended to adorn a new road. Our parents strictly forbade us from playing near the construction site, so we stuck to playing on the vacant lot just behind our house, where we could be seen from the windows. Surprisingly, we never felt the urge to explore farther. I can't explain it, but we just weren't drawn to the vacant lot. Even though kids usually love such places, they're like playgrounds compared to regular courtyards. Be that as it may, from time to time we would sneak into the thickets of burdock and sorrel, playing hide and seek or war games. As soon as the soft summer twilight began to settle in, we would all rush back to the courtyard, as if avoiding the creeping shadows spreading across the vacant lot, despite the fact that the sun was still far from setting. On one scorching day in dusty July, our motley gang set out to the vacant lot in search of some relief from the heat. The older kids settled under the shade of elderberry bushes, lazily playing dominoes, while some dozed off. Meanwhile, we, with shouts and laughter, dashed through the burdock, throwing burrs at each other. Without much enthusiasm, the heat was making us drowsy. Suddenly, Vinny, my buddy, froze in place, squinting into the distance and yelled, "What's that?" The older kids peeked out of the shade, squinting in the sunlight. "What do you see?" "Found something." Excitedly, Vinny pointed towards the center of the vacant lot. "Look over there, do you see it?" Yes, now we all saw it. In the shimmering heat haze, floating hot waves above the ground, there was a window, literally a window. It hung about a meter above the grass and weeds, as if reflected in water, with faintly blurred outlines, and its shutters were open outward, inviting a peek inside into the darkness. Gathering around in a huddle, we approached the incredible sight, with murmurs of disbelief. "What's this?" "Wow, a mirage, huh?" Cautiously getting closer. The window didn't vanish, on the contrary, it became clearer, more real. Pausing a few meters from the marvel, our gang held its breath, torn by conflicting feelings. On one hand, we wanted to touch it to confirm the materiality of the vision, and on the other, it felt like a dream, a hallucination. Straining our eyes into the cool twilight hiding behind the window, we noticed some movement. There, in the somehow existing room, was a child sitting on the bed and playing with toys. Who knows how long we would have watched him, and what other wonders we would have seen if not for Vinny yielding to a sudden childish impulse. He threw his red and white striped ball straight through the open shutters. There was a loud thud. The ball hit the wall next to the child, who, startled by the sharp sound, started crying. Before we could react, a woman rushed into the room at the sound of the child's voice, picked him up, and turned towards the window. Frozen like statues, we stood with gaping mouths, watching this little domestic scene, so unusual in this situation. The woman also stared silently at us with a strange expression on her face, as if not believing her eyes. And then the window simply vanished, just like that, without a bang, click, or smoke. All those special effects that movies bombard us with had disappeared as soon as we blinked. Upon regaining our composure, we excitedly buzzed around, scouring the wasteland where we had seen the window, turning over every bush and trampling every blade of grass, but found nothing that could help us understand the mystery we had witnessed. And what were we hoping to find? A portal to another dimension, an object serving as a catalyst for spatial distortion. We needed to find some semblance of a reasonable and understandable explanation for this marvel that had left us so shaken. Needless to say, our conversations that summer revolved around this incident, endlessly discussing it over and over again, each time crafting increasingly outlandish theories. The adults treated our stories with skepticism, believing that the children were overheated or impressed by an unusual mirage. Whenever Vinny objected, pointing out that the ball was left behind in the window, he was invariably met with the response that he was responsible for his own lost toys and couldn't blame it on someone else. As autumn approached, we dispersed to kindergartens and schools, new events overshadowing the vivid summer memory. Nearly 30 years had passed, and our dear remote outskirts had become densely populated with houses, expanding as the highway now roared beneath the windows of new buildings, no longer a bypass but an integral part of the city. Coming to visit my parents, I nostalgically looked at the familiar neighborhood, reminiscing about old friends, few of whom remained, as many had scattered across the country and rarely visited their hometown. Vinny, for example, had signed up for naval service in Boston during his Army service, and after deciding on his life path, he had sailed the ocean expanses, returning home only once during all these years. Therefore, you can imagine my joy when I was informed that the brave sailor had come on vacation with his wife and little son. Vinny, my old friend. It had been so long since we last saw each other. I had only seen him at the graduation party, so there was no room for complaints. The July heat dashed our hopes for a picnic. Little Bobby, the 2-year-old heir of the sea wolf, overheated and developed a fever, forcing us to settle for the kitchen, thankfully equipped with a powerful fan. I must say my friend had settled quite nicely thanks to his service in the Navy. He quickly bought his parents this apartment located on the first floor of a brand new upscale 9-story building, conveniently constructed right behind our old house. And in place of the vacant lot, they had set up a paid parking lot. So as Vinny put it, his folks could comfortably thumb their noses at the bourgeois, because from one of the room's windows, they had a view of rows of shiny metal beetles reflecting the dazzling sun. He sent his parents to a sanatorium for a month, deciding to relax here himself for a week before heading to the sea. After the customary greetings, exclamations, and hugs, Vinny and I settled down at the table and embarked on a voyage through the waves of memory. Helena, his wife, joined us, occasionally stepping into the adjacent bedroom to check on their little boy, who was quietly playing with his toys on the bed. The conversation flowed leisurely, with only a bit of beer on the table, so our gathering couldn't be called noisy. It's no wonder that, speaking quietly, we easily heard the clattering sound coming from Bobby's room, followed by his crying. Pausing mid-sentence, Helena sprang up and rushed to him, throwing over her shoulder that we shouldn't worry. Perhaps the little one had just dropped something. We nodded in agreement and resumed our conversation, involuntarily listening to what was happening behind the wall. A minute later, Helena returned with her son in her arms, pale as a sheet, and struggled to say, "Guys, you won't believe it." Seating her down, we anxiously began to inquire about what had happened, while Vinny rushed to inspect the child, making sure he wasn't hurt, but everything was fine. Looking bewilderedly at us, Helena recounted. I walked into the room, picked up Bobby, comforted him, and turned towards the window. And I saw a field, a green field overgrown with grass and bushes, and on it children. They were standing a few meters away from the window. They looked so real. Vinny and I exchanged glances. I could swear he was thinking the same thing as I was. I stood there and couldn't move from surprise, and then in an instant everything vanished and there was the parking lot again outside the window. Am I going crazy? Helena looked plaintively at us. No, dear, your mind is sound. Let's go, you'll show us where you saw it. Vinny confidently took his wife's hand and gestured to me, as if to say, let's go together. Pausing at the threshold, we silently looked around. It was an ordinary urban room in an ordinary urban apartment. Bright walls, trendy spotlights on the ceiling, minimal comfortable furniture, or rather, just one bed and a dresser with a mirror. Opposite the bed was the window with its outward opening sashes, overlooking rows of colorful cars, baking in the merciless July sun. On the wall by the bed, next to the toys, there was a dark, dusty spot, and on the floor lay a small red ball with a white stripe, a rubber one, a relic from carefree childhood. I heard them for the first time a couple of days ago. I went to bed late, around 3 in the morning. After walking the dog around 10:30, I returned home, locked the front door, and heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Pressing against the peephole, I tried to guess which of the neighbors was returning home. But the steps, reaching approximately the middle landing, ceased. I assumed it was the neighbor from across the hall, who had a habit of coming out to the landing for a smoke, and promptly forgot about it, closing the second entrance door. Around 1 in the morning, I went to the bathroom and, entering the hallway, noticed that the second entrance door was open. Furthermore, I heard someone running down the stairs again, this time from the top floor. Approaching the peephole, I was sure I would see the neighbor's kids, who had a silly habit of racing up and down the stairs like wild horses. However, the landing was empty. But I had this silly feeling like I was in some wrong movie theater. The sound was there, quite obvious, but the picture didn't change. I even cracked open the door. Now the steps were somewhere below, but the entrance door never slammed shut. Honestly, I started feeling quite uncomfortable. After locking both entrance doors, this time checking the locks thoroughly, I went to the bathroom. However, 30 minutes later, an unpleasant surprise awaited me. It turned out the dog hadn't finished her business outside, and she was too shy to do it at home. In other words, I had to get dressed and take her out again. A small explanation: I've been walking at night peacefully for a long time now, as having a stun gun in my pocket gives me some confidence in my safety. Descending the stairs, I listened to the silence of the lobby. No other footsteps. All the lights were on. ... except on the first floor. A rather unpleasant discovery in the middle of the night. It felt like someone was lurking in the foyer by the entrance door. But the dog couldn't care less about such trifles. She was only concerned about one thing: to find a spot to do her business. To find a flower bed. Returning 5 minutes later, I, as usual, looked around before closing the entrance door, just in case some idiot jumps out from somewhere at the last second. The street was empty. We entered the lobby and started up the stairs. Around the 3rd floor, and I live on the 4th. I heard the entrance door slam shut downstairs, and someone quickly started coming up, as if jumping over each step. I swear I even heard their heavy breathing. The dog and I bolted upstairs. I barely remember how frantically I jabbed the key, trying to get into the slot faster. I could only hear those eerie, rapid steps. When we burst into the apartment, I immediately locked the entrance door and, trembling, leaned against the lock. The steps stopped. By all standards, that someone should have been on our floor now, and precisely because no one was there, it was especially scary. I locked both doors with bolts, checking each one twice, and lay down in bed, trying to calm my shaking. I thought I wouldn't sleep until morning. My hearing caught every rustle. However, by morning I still fell asleep. And when I got up around 10, the first thing I did was check the entrance doors. The locks were intact. But I remembered the position of the metal latch lever on the first door turned all the way to the right, and now it was moved almost to the middle, as if it had been pulled from outside by a strong electromagnet. And now another night has come. Night staircase. Children were vacationing at a pioneer camp. Their toilet was located in the yard. As is often the case, it was a wooden structure. There was a heart-shaped cutout in the toilet door. Up to 6 people could fit in the toilet at once. Late one evening, after lights out, 2 girls went to the toilet. One of them stayed inside while the other decided to wait outside for her friend. She stood there, gazing at the stars, when out of the corner of her eye she noticed a fleeting shadow. It seemed to the girl that it was the shadow of a woman. She continued to wait, but her friend didn't come out of the toilet. The girl went back inside to hurry her friend along, but her friend wasn't there anymore. The girl felt offended, thinking that her friend had sneaked past her and was probably already asleep in her bed. The girl returned to her cabin, but her friend still hadn't returned. The girl waited for an hour, then woke everyone up. The whole group went to look for the missing girl. The counselor entered the toilet with a flashlight. He shone it into each hole, but he didn't find the missing girl there. On the floor, he accidentally noticed a playing card, the Queen of Spades, but he didn't attach any significance to it. They searched for the girl all night but couldn't find her anywhere. Someone suggested that she had run away from the camp. They called her parents, who were also deeply concerned. A week passed, but the girl still didn't appear. They turned to the police, but even they couldn't find her. The vacation was ruined, and many children persuaded their parents to take them home from the camp. It was decided that after lights out, children could only go to the toilet accompanied by an adult. The adult had to ensure that the children didn't disappear like that other girl. One night, a boy urgently needed to use the toilet. He called the counselor. Grumbling, the counselor went with him. The boy went into the toilet alone, and the counselor stayed outside. That boy also disappeared, and again there was a playing card on the floor, the Queen of Spades. Once more, the police arrived at the camp with a dog. The dog refused to enter the toilet, seeming afraid of something. All the children wanted to go home, and almost all of them were taken home by their parents. Only 6 people remained, 3 boys and 3 girls. Their parents couldn't pick them up. They all slept in one cabin. 2 counselors, a girl and a young man, slept with them. Night pots were provided for the children. If someone needed to go to the toilet, they would remove the lid, use it, and then cover it again to avoid any odor. In the morning, they couldn't find one of the boys and one of the girls. On the floor were 2 playing cards. Both were Queen of Spades. The police arrived. They began to suspect the counselors. They arrested the girl counselor. But the next night, another girl disappeared. And once again, they found the Queen of Spades at the scene. After that, the camp was closed, and the children were sent home. The disappearance of the children has never been solved. Some say it was the counselor's doing. Supposedly, someone saw a tattoo of the Queen of Spades on his shoulder. Others say the Queen of Spades was a crazy cook from that camp. Allegedly, she had once been treated in a mental hospital. She was said to catch children to cut off their ears and then make brawn out of them. Some say the Queen of Spades actually exists and is the ghost, the soul of the first camp leader. My fingers tremble as I type on the laptop keyboard because I've never been so scared in my life. It's 2:30 on the clock. I only have half an hour to tell you what happened over the past week. Monday. I had a nightmare. In anticipation of the school week, I went to bed early, but in the middle of the night, I woke up from a strange sensation. I dreamt that I was underwater and struggling to breathe because something was pressing down on me. Gradually, I realized I was waking up, but the feeling of heaviness didn't go away. It was as if something was lying on my chest. I sat up abruptly in bed, and only then could I breathe freely. When I lay down again, the feeling of heaviness didn't return. Tuesday. I was home alone in the evening, writing in my diary, as usual, while listening to my headphones. The volume was loud enough to drown out the outside noise, but after a couple of minutes I realized something was distracting me. Footsteps, a faint creak of floorboards. Taking off my headphones, I listened carefully, the last faint creak and then silence. I would have assumed it was a sound from the neighboring apartments, but I'm well acquainted with the acoustics of the building. Noise from neighbors reaches our apartment only when they talk loudly or throw pans around, which is rare. So the footsteps I heard came from the empty adjacent room. Wednesday. Day. Now I think I should have paid attention to this sooner. With my head buried in everyday chores, I didn't notice anything strange happening around me. But once I did notice, oh, how I wish I had noticed sooner. I had another nightmare at night, this time with me in the lead role. It was as if I was cursed, and now I could feel the consuming fire everywhere, eventually burning in it. When I woke up suddenly, it took me a while to calm the tremors in my body. My parents had already left for work, so I gradually calmed down and headed to the bathroom. I stood under the shower and turned on the cold water. Within a second, I would have scalded myself if I hadn't jumped aside in time. Steam poured out from the cold tap, and genuine boiling water flowed. I turned the hot water tap, the same thing. It was as if cold water didn't exist at all. I remembered the dream, and my teeth started chattering involuntarily. An hour later, both taps continued to spew boiling water. When my mom arrived, I told her about the strange behavior of the water. Naturally, she decided to check, turned on the cold tap, and cold water did flow from the tap. Not just cold, icy. I closed and opened both taps again myself. Everything returned to normal. Thinking it was all due to pipe issues, I went back to the shower. But as soon as I turned on the cold water again, boiling water gushed from the tap once more. Angry and scared, I rushed out of the bathroom to check the kitchen tap. Cold. Icy. My mom looked at me strangely and asked if everything was okay. This incident completely threw me off balance. I waited for my parents to go to bed, then closed myself in my room and put on my headphones. Closer to 1 a.m., I heard footsteps again from the neighboring room. At first, I thought it was one of my parents going to the bathroom, but the creaking became clearer and closer in the direction of my room, as if someone was standing at the door. My nerves couldn't take it. I quickly got up and opened the door. No one. It was quiet in my parents' bedroom, so they were both asleep. Closing the door again, I sat down at the computer and continued studying. However, the strange feeling of discomfort prevented me from focusing on my studies. I turned off the laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed. It was 1:15 on the clock. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up from my own scream. I had a dream so terrifying that I groped for the switch, and only after turning on the light could I begin to think straight. Strangely, I couldn't remember the dream itself, but when I tried to go back to sleep, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the light. For the first time in my life. Time is 2:43. Just a little more time. I can already feel it closing in. Thursday. I didn't go to school, citing feeling unwell. When my parents left for work, I headed to the bathroom and stepped into the shower. My worries about the plumbing dissipated when the warm streams flowed smoothly over my skin. For a minute or two, I stood there, relaxing after a restless night. In the morning, everything that had happened seemed like a bad dream. Unexpectedly, the bright light from the bulb began to flicker at first subtly, then fading more and more distinctly. I felt a surge of chilling fear and quickly got out of the shower, wrapping myself in a towel. At the moment when I almost rushed out of the bathroom, the bulb went out completely. The day passed in a haze. Even in the sunlight, I flinched at any noise. And once, I nearly screamed in surprise when a truck suddenly started outside the window. The sounds of music, usually soothing to me, irritated. Food nauseated me, and overall I felt close to hysterical. Eventually, exhausted and jittery, I lay down on the couch for a minute and immediately fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, it was already dark in the room. Almost subconsciously, I got up and approached the switch, and only when the yellow electric light filled the room could I breathe calmly. The time on the clock in the hallway was 02. That night, I sat down and tried to analyze everything that had happened during that time. Most of the strange occurrences happened between midnight and 3 in the morning, and closer to 3, whatever it was, became more active. 1:17. I started counting the minutes, afraid of what I might hear or no, even thinking that thought was frightening. My parents were sleeping in the next room, and I decided that tomorrow I would definitely tell them what was happening to me. If earlier the prospect of seeing a therapist scared me, in light of recent events, it seemed like the only possible salvation. Around 2:30, despite the loud music in my headphones, I started to fall asleep right sitting at the table. Leaning my head on my hands and closing my eyes, I subtly slipped into sleep. When I woke up, the clock on the laptop monitor showed 2:58. And then the light bulb of the lamp on the table exploded with a loud crack. I screamed in fright and felt my heart racing. Almost on the verge of panic, I kept telling myself just one thing: pull yourself together. You're a rational person, and you can deal with your fear. I closed my eyes, clenched my fists, and began to count to 5 out loud as slowly as possible. The panic gradually subsided, but the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room only intensified. I covered my ears with my hands, afraid that I would go crazy if I heard any sound next to me. That's how I sat for I don't know how long, pulling my knees to my chest and quietly rocking back and forth on the chair. Friday. I woke up in my room on the floor. Apparently, I fell asleep in the same position I was sitting in, so I didn't notice how I slipped off the chair. The curtains in the room were drawn, so it seemed like it was still dark. Strangely, at that moment, I didn't want to see the sunlight at all. The feeling of fear had passed, and I sat there, holding my head in my hands, thinking about what to do next. First of all, I still couldn't bring myself to tell my parents about what was happening. Even if they consider me crazy, send me to a therapist, and then, in turn, leave me for treatment in a hospital, the situation will only get worse. Darkness will come anyway, but facing it with tied hands and a feeling of complete helplessness is much scarier. Secondly, the idea came to me to look up similar cases on the internet. Whatever it was, surely something similar had happened before to someone else. Maybe someone knows how to deal with it. The search results frightened me more than I could have imagined. In all the articles describing situations similar to mine, it was said that this phenomenon is called possession and ultimately it is impossible to fight it. There were also cases where exorcists intervened to expel the devil from the possessed person's body, but in both cases, the outcome was fatal. Although in my case there were many discrepancies with these descriptions, I didn't feel someone's constant presence, except maybe only in the dark. I didn't lose my appetite. I didn't faint. It still made a crushing impression on me. Moreover, from the moment I woke up, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling that everything was going to end soon. This thought didn't bring any particular relief, rather, it reconciled me with some kind of inevitability. Anyway, sooner or later, something had to happen because no matter how long it lasted, I was sure I could never get used to constant fear. The rest of the day passed in some gloomy reflections. Sometimes I caught myself consciously avoiding the unlit corners in the apartment, and that someone from there was watching me closely. Even the return of my parents didn't rid me of this feeling. It was calmer in their presence, but I knew that as soon as I returned to my room and went to sleep, it would start again. When it was 23:15 on the clock, my parents wished me good night and went to their bedroom. I left the table lamp in the living room on and sat on the couch with a book. I couldn't focus on reading. Every nerve in my body was tense, and my hearing, against my will, became sharply attuned to every sound. In the end, I closed the book and went to my room. Turning off the light, I quickly burrowed my head under the covers and closed my eyes, hoping I would fall asleep before midnight. Maybe because I hadn't really slept properly for the past week, or maybe because until the dangerous time. As I started calling it to myself, I felt relatively safe, but sleep didn't keep me waiting for long. Suddenly, as if right above my head, there came a loud, hissing whisper. Instantly awake, I darted out from under the covers and looked around. Goosebumps ran down my skin from that brief sound, because no human throat could replicate it. I tried to utter it, but couldn't come close, even though it echoed vividly in my memory. To say that what happened scared me would be an understatement. It's one thing to feel something nearby, but it's another when it itself announces its presence, and that's truly terrifying. I lay with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes. Since the curtains weren't drawn for the night, moonlight streamed in through the windows, casting eerie shadows on the ceiling. I was afraid to move, afraid even to turn my head. The only thing I could do was repeat the lyrics of all my favorite songs to myself. For some reason, this activity always calmed me and restored my ability to think. Just this once, I almost managed to convince myself that the whisper was just in my imagination, when suddenly the moonlight strangely refracted, and distorted features of a creature's face appeared on the ceiling. I saw it so clearly that I screamed, terror overwhelming me. Even when I blinked the next second, and the vision dissolved, I kept screaming until my frightened parents rushed to me. For long 5 minutes, I tried to regain my composure, sitting under the bright light, feeling the soothing touch of my mother's hand and holding my father's palm tightly. I almost told them about what had happened, but their concern and worry made me bite my tongue. Whatever it was haunting me, and I didn't want my parents to become vulnerable to it too. After explaining that I had a nightmare and nodding in response to their reassuring arguments, I remembered that face once again and involuntarily shuddered. The image had engraved itself so deeply in my memory that even closing my eyes and drifting back to sleep in my mother's embrace couldn't banish the vision of that horrifying image. Saturday. Well, that's almost everything. It's 2:55 on the clock. I have just over 4 minutes left. I'm scared by this strange certainty that today everything will end, but I'm no longer capable of even thinking about what's happening. Just now, something cracked in the next room. Judging by the dark streak at the bottom of the door to my room, the last light bulb exploded. With my parents gone on night duty, I turned on the lights throughout the apartment. The hallway light went out at midnight, and now this. I'm just sitting here writing about it because I have no other way out. Earlier in the evening, I removed the only mirror in my room and put it in the closet. I drew the curtains, turned on the main light, and the table lamp. An hour ago, the chandelier started flickering, then went out. Now the light from the table lamp is starting to fluctuate. I'm sure it will go out in a minute. I tightly locked the door to the room, but I already feel like it doesn't matter at all. It's here, 2:58. A sound is approaching. Oh God, I feel like it's standing behind me. I can't turn around. The lamp has gone out completely. There's only a faint light from the monitor. 2:59. I can't write. Something is about to happen now. I'm scared.